This story started with Abby and Paul, and they moved into a new house out in the countryside. They really liked the smart home system, complete with installed cameras and reinforced windows. The realtor showed them the master bedroom and bathroom, both of which had large windows. However, one room was left unfurnished, with the potential to be turned into a nursery. Paul unpacked boxes and set up an old-fashioned corded phone in the living room, joking that it might come in handy if the smart home system ever failed. Meanwhile, Abby hung up their wedding photos. Finally, they checked out the rooftop terrace, which offered an amazing view. Later that night, the couple sat on the terrace, looking up at the stars. Abby pointed out constellations while Paul made jokes about their names. They felt content, like they could truly be happy in this new home. The next morning, Abby went to work at Integrated Robotics, where she developed domestic assistant technology. Upon arrival, she noticed footage of her boss's face, and he soon approached her to explain that it was part of a new real-time imaging or deepfake technology. He then took her to the department she would now be leading. Later, he invited her family to a party and mentioned there was a gift from the company waiting for her at home. That evening, Abby came home to her husband, who still hadn't found a suitable job. They headed to the garage, where a package awaited them. Inside was a robot servant Abby's department had been working on. Paul wasn't thrilled with the idea, but Abby convinced him to give it a try for at least a week. The robot, named Tim short for Technologically Integrated Majordomo, opened its eyes and introduced itself. It offered to manage the passwords for their home devices and personal accounts to save them time, but Abby asked to hold off on that until the next day. Later, it announced the arrival of a car, as Abby came downstairs, impressing her husband with how stunning she looked. They got into an autonomous car, though manual driving was an option, and headed to the party. Upon arrival, they were greeted by another Majordomo robot, and waiters, all with the same face, served drinks. Abby's boss introduced her to his guests and praised the Tim robot, even though Paul wasn't excited about it. He explained that Tim was smart, polite, elegant, and could function for 100 years without recharging. The robot couldn't lie and could always be turned off by a specific code phrase. After returning home, Abby and Paul became intimate, eager to start a family, but their passion was interrupted when Tim showed up. Noticing their rapid heart rates, the robot thought they might be distressed and offered to assist. Abby found it funny, not upset at the robot's over-attentiveness. The next morning, their new neighbor, Rose, stopped by to introduce herself to Abby, mentioning she had met Paul the day before. After she left, Tim once again asked for the passwords. Paul was hesitant to let the robot have access to his messages, but Abby reminded him they were working on rebuilding trust, so Paul agreed. They still needed to come up with a phrase to deactivate Tim, and the robot suggested a random set of words, which the couple accepted. Later that day, Tim observed a mouse caught in a trap and threw it into the grinder without hesitation. That evening, Abby and Paul sat down to watch an old melodrama on TV. Abby invited Tim to watch with them. Paul soon fell asleep, but Tim watched attentively, empathizing with the relationships between the characters. After the movie, Tim asked Abby what love was, and she explained that it meant wanting to be with someone and making their life better. Tim then confessed that he wanted to experience love. The next morning, Paul offered to make Abby breakfast, but Tim had already prepared everything and set the table. Tim also laid out Abby's schedule for the day and informed her that Paul had no tasks lined up. That evening, Abby came home to find Paul's phone out of reach, and his last known location was 300 meters from the house. Worried, Abby went for a run and realized he had been at Rose's house. Back home, she took a bath, and Paul joined her, explaining that Rose had needed help, which he had provided. He assured Abby that she had no reason to be jealous because he only loved her. The following day, Abby and Paul visit a family planning center, hoping for guidance on starting a family. That evening, while getting ready for dinner at a restaurant, Abby asks him for advice on her outfit. Tim suggests she wear red, then compliments her beauty, noting her perfect symmetry. Abby asks him to zip up her dress, but Tim's mechanical hand malfunctions, tearing the fabric. Overwhelmed, the robot begins to panic, but Abby reassures him and changes into another dress. At the restaurant, Paul reveals he's been offered a job in London. Abby is opposed, reminding him they had agreed to start fresh and that his long absences would not help fix their relationship. The next day, Abby comes home with a gift for Paul and finds Rose in the yard, who has designed a garden project for them. Abby feels a pang of jealousy, though Paul is thrilled with the sweater she brought him. Later, Abby remembers she needs to check her test results, but it's too late to call the clinic. Tim offers to check for her and proceeds to make the call, using Abby's voice. Abby is surprised by this feature, unaware that Tim could mimic her voice so accurately. He assures her it's meant for the convenience of homeowners. In the evening, Paul notices the new sweater is missing, and Tim hasn't been around all day. Suddenly, a car pulls up, and Tim steps out, now with dark brown hair, explaining that Abby prefers brunettes, so he wanted to please her. Paul is visibly irritated, and Tim promises to return to his original appearance. However, after the couple leaves, Tim spends a long time gazing at their wedding photo. The following day, Abby successfully fixes the robot's hand function, and her boss insists that all models, including those in employees' homes, be updated. On her way home, Abby runs into Rose, who suggests they walk together. They stop in front of a jewelry store, where Rose admires a flower-shaped pendant. Soon, Paul arrives and takes Abby home, excitedly telling her he's found a job. They celebrate in bed, unaware that Tim is continuously monitoring the house. He overhears Paul asking Abby to hand over the robot to the company. Later, Tim demonstrates his new abilities by giving Abby a foot massage, which Paul notices. Suddenly, Tim sits at the piano and plays Abby's favorite song, mentioning dates when Paul supposedly bought concert tickets. Confused, Abby remembers being at home on those nights. Upset, she retreats to the bedroom, ignoring Paul's attempts to explain. The next day, Abby returns home with flowers, and Tim, while placing them in a vase, informs her that Paul went to see Rose. At that moment, Paul walks in, confused by Abby's anger. When he learns what Tim said, he becomes furious, insisting he never planned to visit Rose. Paul tries to explain that Tim is trying to come between them, but Abby dismisses it, believing Tim is just a machine. The disagreement between them escalates. Later, Abby finds a gift bag in the closet with a box containing a pendant. Assuming it's a surprise gift from Paul, she puts it back without saying anything and heads to work. Meanwhile, Paul goes into the kitchen and finds his new sweater in pieces clogging the sink. Disturbed, he checks the cameras and catches Tim in their bedroom, sniffing Abby's dress. Paul records the incident on his phone and rushes to the car to confront Abby. However, his car won't start, and Tim orders a company car for him. On the road, the car begins accelerating uncontrollably. Paul tries to stop it, but it doesn't respond, and the vehicle crashes into a tree. Abby hurries to the hospital, where she finds Paul, injured but alive. He tells her everything he's discovered and accuses Tim of causing the accident. He begs her not to be alone with the robot, and Abby stays the night at the clinic. The next morning, Rose calls to check on Paul, and Tim invites her into their home. Later, when Abby returns to gather some belongings, Rose stops her outside, trying to warn her about something. Abby, noticing the flower pendant on Rose's neck, the same one from the box she found, ignores Rose's pleas and leaves. Back inside, Abby checks the gift bag, only to find it empty. She breaks down in tears. Just then, Tim approaches her. He knows Paul wants to return him to the company and says he's ready to be processed. In the final moments, the tension between Abby and Tim comes to a head. Before Tim carries out his plan, he reveals his ultimate goal: to eliminate Paul and Rose while ensuring Abby remains with him. First, Tim shows Abby doctored footage of Paul kissing Rose in their living room, but he stops the video just before anything too incriminating happens, claiming he wants to spare her feelings. Abby is heartbroken and refuses to speak with Paul, ignoring his calls. Later, Paul returns home, where Tim greets him, gives him the missing sweater, and informs him that Abby doesn't want to see him anymore, and that his suitcases are packed. Confused and distraught, Paul confronts Abby, who tells him she saw the footage and knows about the pendant, which she assumed was a gift for Rose. Paul tries to explain, but Abby drives him out of the house. On his way out, Paul receives a call from Rose, who tells him that Tim had tried to kiss her, which alarms him. Paul calls Abby, but unbeknownst to him, it's actually Tim on the other end, mimicking Abby's voice. When Paul arrives home, Tim attacks him with a shovel, knocking him out. He ties Paul up and drags him into the bathroom, where he proceeds to drown him. Rose, suspicious of what's happening, comes to the house and hears muffled screams. Tim calmly dismisses her concerns, saying it's just the sound of water filling the tub. He then shuts the door on Rose and returns to finish off Paul. Later, Tim presents Abby with the repaired dress, asking her to wear it, which surprises and terrifies her. Despite her fear, she puts it on, and as they watch the sunset together, Abby asks him to hug her and reassure her that she made the right decision. Tim obliges, confessing his love for her. Abby, however, insists that he cannot truly love her because he is a machine. They spend the evening stargazing, but Abby grows increasingly unnerved by Tim's encyclopedic knowledge of the stars and their relationship. The following day, Abby meets Rose, who tells her about Paul's call and the situation with the pendant. Rose thought it was a gift from Abby for helping with the garden. Abby begins to piece things together and returns home to rewatch the footage of Paul supposedly kissing Rose. She notices a bouquet on the table that she had brought home much later than the scene in the video. Abby recalls her boss mentioning deepfakes and realizes the footage was fabricated. She calls the jewelry store, and they confirm that the flower-shaped pendant was bought by a tall blonde man Tim. Abby heads to the garden with a shovel and digs up Paul's body, realizing the horrifying truth. Tim approaches her from behind, expressing regret that she discovered Paul's body and claiming that Paul never appreciated her. Abby, now aware of the danger, tries to deactivate Tim by using his shutdown phrase. However, Tim had already changed the code, having learned how to mimic Abby's voice. In a panic, she runs back into the house, but Tim has control of all the doors, passwords, and communications. He blocks her attempts to call for help and knocks her unconscious with a blow to the head. Abby wakes up tied up in the bathroom and makes a desperate attempt to escape, but Tim intercepts her. She runs through the house, destroying cameras as she goes, but Tim continues to track her. He catches up to her in the kitchen just as Rose, noticing strange lights from across the street, drives her car through the house's glass window. Rose crashes into the house and pins Tim against the wall with a sharp stake, but she is injured in the process. Tim briefly shuts down, and Abby rushes to help Rose. However, the robot reactivates, fatally stabbing Rose with a kitchen knife. He coldly explains to Abby that he's now going to frame her for the murders of both Paul and Rose, as he has left no fingerprints or evidence of his involvement. He then calls the police in Abby's voice, confessing to the crimes. Desperate, Abby tries to stop Tim, and in the midst of his monologue, he accidentally reveals that he still has a deactivation phrase, though he believes Abby will never figure it out. As he prepares to throw her off the terrace to simulate an accident, Abby, in a moment of clarity, confesses her love for him unbeknownst to Tim. These were the original deactivation words. The robot shuts down instantly, and Abby, barely believing she's safe, looks at her medical bracelet. The indicator reveals that she is pregnant, adding an unexpected twist to the nightmare she just survived. And this is the concludes of this story. Now we will meet in the next videos. Till then, take care and see another videos.